tenemos por un lado a Elisa Collado Fregoso, y también tenemos como invitada especial a Georgia Gugleini. No sé si dije bien su apellido, si no, le pedí disculpas por adelantado por pronunciarlo mal. Ellas van a apoyarnos el día de hoy en este panel llamado Science Communication. Entonces, vamos a empezar con Georgia. Me voy a permitir leer una pequeña biografía para que tengan una idea de quién es ella y qué hace, antes de pasarle la palabra. Georgia es una escritora independiente y periodista de ciencias de la vida, biomedicina, política científica y las diversas intersecciones de la ciencia y la sociedad. Sus historias han aparecido en Nature, Science, Scientific American, entre otras. Ha sido invitada a diversos paneles y mesas de discusión sobre comunicación de la ciencia y ha recibido varios premios entre los cuales se encuentran el premio Stanley Klein por escritura científica en 2017 y el premio John Kendrew en 2020. Ella tiene un doctorado en biología por la European Molecular Biology Laboratory y una maestría en escritura de la ciencia por el MIT. Georgia vive y trabaja en Basilea, Suiza, y cuando no está escribiendo sobre ciencia, se encuentra corriendo a lo largo del río Rin o haciendo senderismo en las montañas suizas. Bueno, sin más, le cedo la palabra. Georgia, thank you very much for being here. So, this is all yours.
And I just wanted to give, a brief introduction about what science communication in general is. In general, the science communication is defined as the practice of informing, educating, and raising awareness about science-related topics. And there are two types of science communication. One is science in reach, which is, grant writing or technical writings or manuals or scientific articles, and also science scholarly communications and publication in scientific journals, which is what Elisa Collado will talk about later. So I'm not going to focus on this now. And then there is science outreach, which is typically done by professional scientists or science communicators to non-expert audiences. And there are many ways of doing outreach. You have outreach events or science writing, podcasts or videos. But today I'm going to focus on science writing, which because it's what I mostly do. So many people in the field of science writing make a key distinction between public information and science journalism. So public information is an umbrella of terms for a variety of activities done by research institutes, universities, science museums, which is done for the purpose of publicity, but also education or raising awareness about science topics. And instead, science journalism is independent, is done by science journalists and provides context and perspective about scientific findings or scientific topics. And it also holds scientists up to scrutiny. So, science journalists, they provide more context about the social and political implications of a scientific discovery, and they investigate overinflated claims or dodgy statistics. So they are quite different in terms of goals. And so we have on one side public information officers and science journalists. So public information officers typically produce content about the science produced by the organization for which they work and they're paid by. and their content appears in the institution website or can be part of a press release that is sent out to the media, so to journalists. And instead, science journalists, they work for newspapers, for magazines, TV and radio stations. And as I said, they do more reporting, critique, and analysis of the subject than a public information officer. Just to give you an example of how this works, the kind of news cycle. Let's say that scientists at University X, they make a discovery about how hippo poop can kill fish, right? So science writers in the communication officer of Institution X, they put together a press release that they sent out to science journalists. And then science journalists, if they want to cover the story, if they think that the story is worth covering, they typically, dig a bit deeper in the topic. They interview outside experts, the authors also, and usually the story are published in a magazine. This is The Atlantic, for example, and of course, people then read about the stories. That's what you see in the newspapers, in the magazines, and just as I mentioned before, science journalism also highlights some limitations and caveats of scientific discoveries. So this, for example, is a story that I wrote for Science about a genetic risk score that could predict the likelihood of being obese later in life. And if you see what I underline here, these are limitations of the study, or worries that other scientists have about the implications of the findings for the society. And I was also mentioning that these risk scores, for example, are optimal for white people, but they're not predictive for other ethnic groups. And science journalism is not only writing about new discoveries, also policy. So, for example, this is a story that I wrote for Science about how a new science funding agency that was announced in Italy, whether it could actually help Italy fund its research better. This is a feature that I wrote for Nature about a group of genome scientists who are working with indigenous communities and other underrepresented groups to make genomic science more inclusive. And this was about peer-reviewed studies, which had some flaws. It actually the study was retracted almost a year after I wrote this article. So this is kind of what science journalists cover, so not only research news but also policy and other aspects of science and issues in the scientific communities. I know most of you probably are not familiar with science journalists, so there are different types of people in science journalism. So there are reporters. Reporters actually write, they find stories, they report the stories, and they write stories for magazines, TV and radio stations, and newspapers. Stories can be short news stories or longer features which dig deeper into a topic. For example, broadcast journalists do the same, but for TV and radio. And then you have editors. Editors usually, oversee the process. They coordinate, for example, graphics and art for a piece, and then you have copy editors that check stories for accuracy and house style, for example. Then you have authors, so journalists that who also write books. Carl Zimmer, Ed Young, Rebecca's Clute are excellent examples of this. In communication offices, in research in research institutions or universities, you have more or less the same organization. You have reporters and editors who oversee the work of reporters. And journalists and editors can be staffers, so they can be employed in full-time in a magazine or newspaper, or they can be freelance. For example, I'm a freelance writer, so editors assign me stories, or I pitch stories, and I assign, and editors, if they're interested, they assign me the stories. So these are two different types of work that you can do as a science journalist. There are advantages and disadvantages. We can talk probably later during the Q&A session if you have questions about that, about the advantages and disadvantages. Many people ask me, what kind of skills do you need to become a science journalist? And many people that I know are scientists. And I always tell them that, in many ways, science journalism is similar to research, because journalists, like scientists, they find an aspect of science that fascinates them, and they really, ask questions and look for evidence to provide answers. So, I would say that definitely, to become a science journalist or writer, you need to have the ability to write about science with clarity. You need to have a sense of what makes a science story. So, why people should care about this now. And an ability to read, understand, and synthesize complex scientific information is definitely useful. And as I said before, science journalists, they investigate claims, overinflated claims or statistics. So you need to have a healthy skepticism and try to dig deeper into the stories. And oops, this came in the middle. And definitely the ability to chase a story down. So many times, people, especially people in the government, they will not want to talk to you, so you really have to chase people down and look for stories and try to get to the bottom of a story. So definitely the willingness to talk to people is a plus if you want to become a science journalist. And there is definitely no set route into science journalism. So if you talk to science journalists, they will tell you that they got into science journalism through a different route. You can do undergraduate or graduate programs in science writing or science journalism. You can do an internship. You can do online courses. You can do, just keep your own blog, or whatever other path you choose. But, I just wanted to give you an overview of my personal pathway into science journalism. And as Ivan mentioned earlier, I have a PhD in biology, so I started as a scientist. I was a scientist. I did a PhD in biology at EMBL in Heidelberg, in Germany. And, while I was there, I realized that I really liked to write about science. And I started to collaborate with the communication office of EMBL, and I wrote a couple of stories for them, and I realized that I could actually make a living out of writing about science. So I decided to go on and pursue a master in science writing. I did a master's in science writing at the MIT in Cambridge, and there, it was very helpful for me because I learned about a lot of aspects, like, learn about the basic skills in reporting and research. We did science, a bit of data journalism, a bit of, podcastings, videos. We learned about video documentaries. We wrote essay, news stories, features. So I basically learned how to write about science in the master, and then I went on to work as an intern with the news teams of Science and Nature in Washington, D.C. And that was also very helpful because I basically learned how to to work in a newsroom, and today they're still my clients. So it's it was good to build a network of clients. And I don't know if anyone is interested. We can also talk later. I just made a list of major science journalism writing programs around the world. So in the USA, there are these 4 programs at MIT, US Santa Cruz, Boston University, and New York University. At the UNAM, there is I see that there is a graduate program in science journalism, and then in Europe there are many. If you want to see all of them, you can go to this website, the questproject.eu. They have a list of actually an interactive map where you can see where the major science journalism writing programs are. Also getting an internship, master's is one option. Is good, to have the basic skills, to learn about the basic skills in science writing, but it of course can be expensive and time consuming. So, another option is getting an internship. And also many people ask me, how I find, how can I find an internship? And my, advice would be, start by building up a network of people in the industry. So if you know journalists, just contact them, talk to them, ask them how they got an internship or how they got the job that they got, and definitely sign up to the industry association. So in the US there is the National Association of Science Writers. In the UK there is the Association of British Science Writers. In Mexico there is the Red Mexicana de Periodistas de Ciencia. So you can really, first of all, meet a lot of people in the industry, and also have news about jobs or internships that open up in the field. And definitely check websites, of universities and research centers, or not national local newspapers, or also magazines. New Scientist, I think they advertise it on their website. Also, the Science and Nature, also on social media, they advertise the internships. You can use Google, which is always your friend. And once you find an internship, definitely you have to impress. To apply and impress with clips and ideas. And I know that probably many of you have never written about science. Probably many of you are scientists. So my advice would just to have a go at writing. I think that's the best way to start. Write something, record some audio, shoot a video. You can start a blog or YouTube channel. You can collaborate with your institution's communication office. That's what I did when I was doing my PhD. You can write for a local newspaper or the university newspaper. Or sign up for an evening class or online course. There are many online courses in science journalism. This will help you to build skills and also show that your commitment to get an internship, and provide you with some clips that you can show to prospective employers. I am done with my presentation. I know the Q&A session is later, but if you have any questions, you can write them to me, also in Spanish. I will try to answer in Spanish. This is my email, and if you want to read my stories, you can follow me on Instagram. I usually post all my stories there, and on Twitter. Or this is my website, and you can read some of my stories directly from there. So I will stop sharing my screen now.
Well, Georgia, thank you very much for your intervention. Very interesting what you do in science journalism. Sure, we're gonna have a lot of questions for you in the Q&A session. But let's get to the other panelist. Ahora me voy a permitir presentar a nuestra siguiente panelista para que la conozcan, tengan una idea de lo que hace. Ella es Elisa Collado Fregoso. Es editora de las secciones de Ciencia de Materiales, Física e Interdisciplinario de la revista SN Applied Sciences de Springer Nature. Ella obtuvo su doctorado en espectroscopía de celdas solares orgánicas en el Imperial College de Londres y tiene una experiencia postdoctoral de 2 años en física de dispositivos fotovoltaicos orgánicos en la Universidad de Potsdam, en Alemania. Es coautora de 20 artículos de investigación en áreas que van desde la cinética química y la espectroscopía, hasta la física del estado sólido, la optoelectrónica y la caracterización de materiales aplicado a celdas solares orgánicas. Elisa está permanentemente interesada en el cambio climático, en la energía solar, en la bioelectrónica y en la espectroscopía. Pues bueno, esa es una pequeña presentación, Elisa. Thank you very much for being here. The audience is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind presentation and for Clubes de Ciencia MX for the invitation to this Science Café. I'm very excited and I hope you find it useful. So my presentation is going to be a bit shorter in terms of the slides, but I hope that you find them good. And I'm going to tell you a bit about my academic trajectory. So I'm going to share my screen in a minute. So I had kind of like a last minute change on how to present this, and I hope it's going to be interesting. So this is a very short presentation of how I went from Mexico City to Dordrecht, which is the place where I'm now in the Netherlands. Which is very, very far from Mexico, so and everything in between. So I studied in the National University Autonomous of Mexico, the UNAM. I studied chemistry, that's my major. I was always interested in science because I was lucky to be born in a household in which my dad was a scientist, well, he is still a scientist. So I was always surrounded by somehow, books related to science and to maths and everything. So I studied chemistry. I never knew that I was going to end up as an editor. So that wasn't planned until much later. So as it was mentioned, I did my PhD in London. So I did my master's first in the UNAM as well. So I did chemical science. I started to become interested in physical chemistry. So I always felt a bit funny about, and a bit strange, let's say, because I didn't quite like the labs. I remember that I used to hate my organic chemistry lab. And I felt a bit funny about that. But then I started focusing more on quantum chemistry and thermodynamics. And that was kind of like instrumental later on, because then I realized I actually didn't quite like to be in the lab. So that played a role in taking the decision of becoming an editor. So you see here the UNAM, that's where I started, in the chemistry faculty in my family, Mexico. And the first stop, as I mentioned, was London. So I started applying for PhD programs. Incidentally, I didn't have a specific goal of where to go. What I knew is that I wanted to use the tools that I learned in my master's by doing spectroscopy, and I wanted to do it in a way that was more applied, because I quite liked optical spectroscopy, which is what I did when I was in my master's. But I always felt like I wanted to do something that for me had more meaning. So I started looking at the intersection of what can I do with optical spectroscopy on something that's got organic materials, because that's what I like and that's where my expertise was. and applied it to something that has environmental applications, and that the obvious way to do that was to research on organic solar cells, which funnily and luckily was booming at that time when I was looking for PhD. So I'm talking about 2010, 2011 when I started my PhD. So I went there to Imperial College. I was also very lucky that I was in a great research group with a great researcher who not only taught us about science and about everything related to polymer solar cells, which is where I did my research, but also a lot about managing teams and about having a nice environment to work, which I think is fundamental to have a nice experience or a good experience during your PhD. The PhD is a difficult time and a lot of people struggle, but I think it makes a big difference if you can have a good research group that is friendly and that is supporting in any trouble that you can have, and that many troubles come as you might know. I got married. And then later on, I started thinking, after I finished my PhD, I thought of applying to jobs outside academia. I wasn't super certain about what I would do, but actually I started focusing on science communication. I thought of the idea of becoming an editor. I applied, I think, probably to a couple of jobs there, but I wasn't entirely certain. So I was also applying to some academic positions as a postdoc, and I ended up having a good offer in Potsdam, very close from Berlin in Germany, which is the photo you can see is Potsdam. So that's where we went. It kind of fitted because my partner at the time was still doing German history, so we went to Germany for a couple of years. It was a really nice experience. It was on a similar topic of the one of my PhD. So I carried on working with organic photovoltaic devices. And then I realized that I actually started liking a lot reviewing processes. So as I published some papers, I started also doing some reviewing, and I realized that I quite like doing the review process. So I quite like being a reviewer of those papers. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed always reading articles and writing about them. So that kind of like made me remember that I had already this idea of becoming an editor. And then what I did is I basically signed up for a lot of the job advertising, job alerts in the major publishing houses. And I started applying for jobs shortly before I finished my postdoc. It was very nice to be there, and I think I still like research. So sometimes I think maybe I could have carried on, but at the same time, you know, a part of me tells me, oh no, but you know, you kind of don't like to be in the lab. So I always sort of like to analyze results and to discuss about results and to write about results rather than the actual taking of the data. So that was kind of like a pretty clear indication to me that the editor job would be a good one. Of course, I didn't know what it was going to be about before I actually did it, but so far I'm very happy. So I think it was a good decision. So you see later on we moved again. So we went from Berlin, where we were living, to Dordrecht. We actually live in Rotterdam, which is close to Dordrecht. It's a small city. Of course, I wasn't sure whether it was a good move after living, you know, after progressively downsizing from Mexico City, then to London, then to Berlin, and then to Dordrecht. But I found it really nice. I quite like it here. It's a very nice city. It's smaller, even though it looks big. It's a smaller city, so you can have a good life with the advantages of a big city and not so many disadvantages. And then, yeah, maybe a bit more about the managing editor role. This is basically the title of the job that I have. As Georgia mentioned, I am basically looking at scientific papers. So the science that I look at and the science that we communicate is is mainly for scientists, not so much for the broader public, because as you know, scientific papers tend to be very specific, very specialized. So they have to have a certain number of requirements in terms of quality and in terms of a structure. So it's not intended to be read. Of course, they can be read by anyone, but normally scientists write for other scientists, right? So what do I do as a managing editor? I see it in a way. I didn't know that, of course. I didn't know that there were so many roles within a publishing company. I didn't know what the difference between a publishing editor was and a managing editor and an associate editor. And it really depends a lot in the place where you work and the actual objectives that you have. So there's not such a fixed thing of this is what it is and it always means the same. So it really is tailored to each specific position. But in my position, which is in the journal that you see, SN Applied Sciences, I basically oversee and I check the entire workflow of papers. What I mean is that we receive the papers after they go through a check of quality. They go through they go to the editor, and I basically check them again for quality. If I decide that it's got enough quality, I assign reviewers, and then I check that the reviewers are doing their revision process in time. And that they're doing a good job. I decide whether I want 2 or more revisions, and then I take a decision. Basically, the big chunk of my work is actually taking decisions in each individual paper that we receive. Now, I am specifically focused on the physics and material science, and one extra section that is interdisciplinary that can have aspects of other areas. And those are the areas that I actually look at, the papers that come to those areas. So that's the core thing, the main duty of a managing editor. We also have to acquire content. So for that, we collaborate with researchers. It's very good, as Georgia also mentioned, to have good relationships and good networking with scientists, which, you know, after a PhD and a couple of postdocs, normally that happens, but it's good, let's say, to have this person attitude and to keep a good network so that you can talk to people. So this journal, SN Applied Sciences, is a new journal. So for us, we had to set up basically and started it from scratch, so from zero. So we had to appoint all the editorial board, ask researchers, do you want to become, assess their CVs, see which areas we want to encourage, collaborate with researchers to acquire special issues or topical collections. We normally have to go to conferences and keep updated on which are the hot topics within each section, within each discipline. And in general, we oversee the development of the journal from the journal, and also each journal section in terms of indexing. That means, how much the papers are cited, the impact factor, all the operation within related to the journal, to make sure that things are working well, that the systems that we use to work with the papers are working well, that marketing is being done. We collaborate with the marketing department, and basically with a lot of departments within production department, for example, as well. So we have a lot of meetings with the other editors. We're 5 managing editors in my journal. But again, as I mentioned, this is very dependent upon the journal and how the journal is set up. This is how this journal works, but other journals will work differently. I very much like what I do. I felt very welcome. This is my first day at work. As you can see, everyone is very friendly. I quite like that the publishing, at least Springer Nature in that sense, has a very similar environment to research, in which people are quite relaxed. People are nice, they're sharing, they are collaborative. And yeah, I mean, I've been enjoying my time there. And I guess I can wrap up more or less. And if you have more questions about what's my role or how I got there, you can always ask them in the questions, and I'll be doing my best to reply. I can do Spanish as well. So yeah, so that's pretty much what I can say. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay, Elisa, thank you very much for your contribution. Very interesting. For those who try to publish in any journal, the journal process is a mystery. So your talk was very interesting for some of us. Now we have the Q&A section. We have some questions for you. So we have around 10 minutes for this. Let me start with a question from a Facebook viewer. Just let me get the question. The question says, I noticed both of you have PhDs. Would you say this fact, the PhD, made it easier for you to enter into the science communication world? Would you say it's a requirement to get an editor or a journalist position? Elisa?
Yeah, I can start with that. For an editorial position, it depends exactly on which position you have. If you want a position in which you're actually looking at the content, so if you're assessing content in the journal, you do need a PhD. So yeah, it's definitely an advantage. So there are other positions, for example, if you're an assistant, if you're a production manager, not all positions require a PhD within the publishing companies. But if you're interested in specifically editorial positions, and the more you go within content, the more advantageous it will be to have a PhD or even a postdoc.
Okay, thank you. Georgia, as a science journalist?
Yeah, I would say it's not required, to have a PhD. I know many colleagues who don't have a PhD and are, excellent journalists. I mean, Carl Zimmer, he's very famous. He doesn't have a PhD. He's not even a scientist. So definitely it's not a requirement. However, like for me, for example, I find it very helpful. It's not the degree per se that it's useful, but it's, just the experience of staring at that text, and having no clue about what it's about. So that's something that PhD students have experienced at least once in their life. So just having the patience and resourcefulness to, to figure out these puzzles is something that the PhD is a skill that I built during the PhD, and it's very helpful now as a journalist.
Okay. Thank you for both of you for answering that question. We have another question from Rogelio Hernandez. This question is for Elisa. What do you think are the main qualities or abilities to obtain an editor position, and how do you train these qualities?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would say that anything that proves, obviously, the fact that you have published your own articles helps a lot, because if you're going to be assessing an article, of course, you need to know yourself how to write one, right? And not only you need to know how to write an article, you need to know what a good article has, how it is written properly. If you have provable experience in reviewing, for example, that's very helpful. If you have been an editorial board member, if you have been a guest editor, any type of, let's say, that's official experience, but let's say non-paid experience or something like that, that's something that is definitely going to be considered. Apart from that, of course, having a good network of scientists, still being in touch with scientists, that's always very helpful, because probably they'll want to see that you can still link with them and, recommend them, and they recommend the journal. Being proactive. If you have written about science, that's probably good as well. Sometimes you have to do a bit of blogging. You have to write editorials. Again, that depends on each journal, but showing the ability to do a good writing, not necessarily scientific, but also like an editorial piece, like a news and views. That's also helpful. Again, that will depend a lot on each specific application. So of course, I would advise everyone to look at exactly what the requirements of each position are. But yeah, that will be in general the advice.
Okay, really good advice for anyone who tries to be an editor someday. The next question is for Georgia. As a science journalist, what is the role of fake news in science today? I mean, I suppose you have to deal with this every day. So, what are your thoughts on fake news, specifically science fake news?
Scientific fake news have definitely, detrimental effects on society. Like if you think about, the vaccines toxicity, which is, definitely some fake news that came from flawed articles, from flawed papers a few years ago. So that can really have detrimental effects on society at large. Specifically, like for me, fake news are, they don't really affect my job, because my job is actually to look at the news and make sure that they are as accurate as possible. So I would say that definitely fake news coming from in science are dangerous for the society. They are not so dangerous for scientists, for the scientific communities, because the scientific community is used to, test, claims, and so fake news don't really affect them. And good science journalists usually, they really dig deep into stories. They ask, several experts, so it's really hard for us to be affected by fake news. But yes, they are a big problem in science and society, unfortunately. I don't know if that answered the question, or.
Yeah, I think that answers the question. Yes. Thank you, Georgia, for the answer. And this is a very interesting question for both of you. What do you think about Sci-Hub? This web page with, Sci-Hub. Do you have any opinion?
We can talk about maybe like open access science. I would say it's
okay.
less controversial. I don't know,
less
Elisa.
Controversial. Actually, we have a question about open access.
Okay.
So, just let me find it. Well, that is almost the same question. What's your opinion about publishing and distributing open access material?
Yeah, I mean, Elisa can comment on the journal's point of view as a journalist and a member of the society. Of course, it's nice and it's good to have open access to scientific findings, especially now. Many journals, including Nature, are actually making the articles on COVID-19 open and available to everyone in this period. So definitely, I think that the publishers and journals are aware of the importance of making the scientific findings available to everyone. But Elisa will tell you also what the fees that are used to access the journals are used for, and how they are useful also for scientists and the scientific communities. But of course, it would be helpful for everyone to have everything open and accessible.
Melissa?
Yes, actually, I thought that question might pop. I was actually prepared for someone asking for that. It's definitely a controversial topic. I mean, open access, I think, is viewed by most people, including the publishing companies, as something good. It is not sometimes it depends. It's not that easy to implement in each and every journal, because different journals have different procedures and have different amount of editorial input. And I think a lot of the discussion that is not seen is that each paper gets handled by so many people, and the publishing companies are so big and have so many departments that you wouldn't imagine how many hands have handled these papers, right? So there's a big discussion about that. But I think before, when I was a scientist, of course, I was also thinking, yeah, the subscription, whether it's fair or not, whether someone should always access every paper published, because I mean, it's completely understandable that one feels that you're doing all the job, and that and then the company is just taking. But actually, once you start working there, you realize that that's not true, right? I mean, there's a lot of work related to the publishing of the paper. There's a lot of scrutiny, and for each paper that gets published, there's a lot of them that get rejected. So this needs to be taken into account, right? Because otherwise, the jobs of many people that are editors are, you know, they have to be somehow compensated. So I understand it's a very sensitive discussion, and on the one hand, you can see that, you know, it's a question of fairness. That yeah, it should be open for everyone, but at the same time, we also want quality, right? And if it's just open there as a preprint, it's okay, sure, but there's no scrutiny on that, right? Everyone can upload anything, and you don't know if it's right or not, or whether the community agrees that it's right or not. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work in the editorial office regarding those aspects. So of course that entails certain compensation. So yeah, it's a sensitive matter, but I think in general, everyone is trying to go to open access in most journals, I would say. I mean, also within the publishing companies.
Okay, thank you very much, Elisa, for your answer. We only have 5 minutes left, so I would like to invite you to give us some final remarks, a conclusion for this Science Cafe. Georgia, if you want to start.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as I said, science journalism is, you know, probably Elisa mentioned how happy she is in her role, and I should also mention that I am very happy as a science journalist. I was looking at some questions, and someone was asking, would you go back to the lab? No, the answer is no. Of course, I will, you know, as soon as I started being a journalist, I never looked back, and it's a very rewarding career. Is very competitive. That's something that I probably didn't mention. So definitely, you know, one needs to find the best path that also fits their interest and background. You know, as I said, if anyone wants to discuss, you know, if they have ideas or you know, want to discuss any aspect of the path to becoming a science journalist, you know, they can reach out to me. We can, you know, talk over Zoom, and I will be, you know, happy to give advice. But yeah, again, I should thank Clubes de Ciencia for this opportunity, and for, you know, the opportunity to share my experience with everyone.
No, we thank you for being here at this time. I mean, in Europe is kind of late, so thank you very much.
Yeah. No.
Elisa, any final remarks?
Well, thank you for the invitation. I was very happy and very excited to share. I hope that people have found it insightful. Yeah, I was also reading some of the questions. Some of them are kind of long to answer. For example, someone asked how can you develop a good abstract? So just to leave with a good note, think of it as a 3-part, right? There's always a good paragraph is always got like an introduction sentence, and then developing sentence, how you do what you're saying you did, and then conclude how is that impactful, how is that good, why is it important, why someone should care. So that's a super summarized what a good abstract should have. And what I would do, what I would emphasize is that it's super important to write a good abstract, because that's the title and the abstract are the first impression for an editor in terms of how good the paper will be, because your ability to summarize is very indicative of how good the research is or will be in the paper. Of course, that's just a generalization. It's not always the case, but yeah, maybe I just wanted to reply that question and just say thank you for the invitation. I hope that it was useful for people to hear about science communication. and about the editorial world. And well, thank you again to the organizers for putting up this effort and doing this possible.
Thank you, Elisa. And Georgia, the same. A todos por habernos acompañado. Esperemos que esta plática les haya resultado interesante, que hayan aprendido muchas cosas de este mundo que es la comunicación de la ciencia. Hay que hacer ciencia, pero también hay que comunicarla a los pares o como decía Elisa, al público en general. Todos merecemos saber de ciencia. Muchas gracias por haber asistido. Esto sería todo. Y tengan un buen fin de semana, un buen viernes. Hasta luego, hasta la próxima. Compórtense.
Gracias. Thank you very much. I'm going to close. I already closed the live stream, and now I'm ending the Zoom call. Thanks everyone for joining us, and it was super interesting to know about your trajectory and about your career path. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.